Perfect. I guess we'll find out in a minute. Okay. So, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. This is my very first time doing public speaking, but I was telling Donald that I would rather get up and publicly speak than sing, ever. There's something like so vulnerable about singing in front of a group of people that I couldn't. So, you're amazing. So, couple of housekeeping items. I'm actually gonna pull this here-ish. Hopefully I don't mess up my camera stuff, because I did not prepare for that. A few housekeeping items. I have a tendency to swear, and I'm just admitting that because I really try not to. My husband knows I struggle with this. So if something slips out, I totally apologize. I'm just asking for your grace in advance. I'm going to try not to, but that's it. I'm also going to touch on a lot of trauma points this evening. I gloss over 20 years, and it's a lot. I decided to just stick with 20 years instead of going 40, because the 20 years is enough. So I do touch on a lot of trauma points, and I want you to also know that in between all of the trauma, and there's a lot of it, that my life has also been filled with a lot of beauty. And a lot. And that even as a child, there were some really good points of a lot of great trips. And is this going in and out, or am I imagining that? Ish? Okay, I'll just keep talking. So, as I go into the story, just remembering that Jesus envelops all of it and the entire narrative, and while it is still in the works because I'm still here, he is always sovereign and always good. So if we can all agree to just kind of remember, as I'm highlighting these horrific traumas, that at some point, I promise, I will get to the light and to the good and all that stuff. So, let's see here. Just set those so I can see my next point. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. I was born in Seattle, Washington, on a rainy November, because of course it was raining there. I am the youngest, right? Somebody's like, of course, yes, that's why I moved to Phoenix. So I got tired of the Northwest. So I'm the youngest of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My oldest brother is 7 years older than me, so there was a little bit of a gap. We were not friends then, but we're really good friends now. And if this goes out, can you just give me if it completely dies, and then I'll just talk even louder. I have that gift of a very loud voice too. So my mom stayed home while my dad worked. It was kind of typical, but I don't know how long that went on for, because I was the youngest of 4, so I don't know what was happening in the 70s prior to me coming. When I was 2 years old, though, my mother was in nursing school. So one of my first memories of family life, I was 13 months old, which is, I guess, very odd for somebody to remember something when you're 13 months old. But that was my first memory. It was Christmas, and I actually have a photo of it, and I could not bring myself to even put it up on the PowerPoint because I was like, oh, even now it's traumatizing. But my parents had a friend come over in a Santa Claus suit, and I had on my red velvet little outfit with the plastic diapers, that you had in the 70s because you had the pin cloth diapers. It's very uncomfortable. And I literally had no clue what was happening. 13 months old, I see this strange man walk in some crazy outfit, and I thought my parents were trying to give me away. I, in the photo, am arms and legs out to the sides, red-faced, screaming bloody murder. And that cemented in my brain abandonment. I didn't know it at the time, but I was like, oh my God, my parents are trying to give me away to this crazy guy in a horrible suit. I didn't know what was happening. And so literally, in that moment, I felt like they're trying to give me away. And I felt very unwanted and unloved. And I would spend most of my life fighting off those lies. So I had some good memories here and there for a while, like dancing to ABBA in the living room. We had a rabbit farm when I was growing up, camping, lots of camping, and big, huge beach outings because it was Washington. And I learned to love being outside. Even now, I love being outside. My mom used to sing and play the piano and the guitar and the accordion, which is very impressive because that is very cumbersome with a lot of buttons. So she's really good at it. So one day, while she was playing the piano, though, one of my siblings wanted her to stop. And I figured I would just read right from here. So, trauma is not just a singular event sometimes, especially with complex post-traumatic stress, which I get into like the difference between PTSD and CPTSD in a little bit. It's not always a singular event, and it can cross lifetimes and generations until something or someone breaks the cycle. So really writing this to my sibling that day, I said, I remember the day I was introduced to your rage in a small middle-class town in Washington. I was 2. I was dancing in my diaper while my mom played the piano and sang. I didn't have a care in the world, but you had other plans. You descended on the moment like a hydrogen bomb. I watched as you walked up behind my mother with a plastic cup and without a word, slammed it into the top of her skull. The music stopped that day. I stood, staring as I watched the bright red blood seep from the back of her head. And she began screaming, and my dad ran in bewildered at the scene. All you had to say was, I told you to stop. In a moment, you did what you do best. You sucked all the life from the room. Reveling in the pain you inflicted, the energy you consumed, you dropped the cup and walked away. The music stopped that day in my house, and I don't remember Mom ever playing music again. Thank you for this, Annie. So, what kind of person does these things? Has anybody in here ever seen like those Criminal Minds shows? Like, show of hands, has anybody? Right? Like, we've all seen it, and we're like, who are these people? They don't exist. Yes, they do. So, those people on those shows, they exist. And they had a mom and a dad, and they probably had siblings. And not all people that have those mental disorders grow up to, murder other humans and take their high heels. Some of them grow up to be politicians or other things. Which is it's unfortunately true. So, I'm gonna segue here just a little bit because I want you to keep some definitions in mind as I walk through my story. So, what is a sociopathic narcissist? That's a big term, right? We hear this stuff loosely dropped all the time. So, I'll go through a couple of clinical definitions real quick. Narcissistic personality disorder is not just somebody who takes a lot of photos of themselves and puts it up on Instagram. Narcissistic personality disorder is one of several types of psychological disorders that affects the personality. It is a mental condition that involves an individual exhibiting an exaggerated sense of self-importance, a total lack of concern or empathy for others, and an unrelenting desire to receive admiration or adoration from others. People with narcissistic personality disorder often experience disruptions both in their personal lives and professional relationships. They become very easily offended and disappointed if they're not given admiration or attention they believe they deserve, whether they do or they don't. This can be overt, which is very easy to see, or it can be covert, which is not so easy to see. So that's narcissism. So what is a sociopath? That is also something that we hear, very loosely thrown around. So sociopathy refers to a pattern of antisocial behaviors and attitudes. Antisocial does not mean an introvert. An antisocial person is somebody who is against the norms of society. So they have a pattern of antisocial behaviors and attitudes, including manipulation, deceit, aggression, and a lack of empathy for others. Sociopathy is a non-diagnostic term and is not synonymous with psychopathy. They're different, although they overlap. Sociopaths may or may not break the law, but by exploiting and manipulating others, they violate the trust of the human enterprise. That's all of us. So what do you get when you put these together? It's not fun. A sociopathic narcissist will be cold and callous, but will also be seeking the admiration of others. So even though they're cold and callous, they're going to be doing whatever they can to get people to like them. It's all self-serving though. They will have a disdain for people, secretly have a disdain for people, and think it's okay to exploit and dispose of others in whatever way it helps them to get ahead. So while sociopaths don't think about other people unless they can benefit from them in any way, narcissists only think of others in terms of how they reflect back on the narcissist. This can be mind-boggling, right? You listen to all of this and you're like, so confusing. Yes, it is. Imagine growing up in a house with somebody like this. You can't figure out if they're coming or going. So when you put these two qualities together, it really results in a person who is on a quest for power and control. They use the love and admiration of others as a tool to dominate and manipulate, and who goes about all of this thinking it's their right to do so, and they feel absolutely justified in it. So manipulating others, using others, it doesn't slamming a cup into the back of somebody's head, doesn't matter. They had a right to do it because the whole world revolves around them. There will be no guilt, no apologies, and no remorse, ever, at all. So, keeping that in mind, this is what one of my siblings is like, and where a lot of my trauma stemmed from, but not completely all of it. So, now that we have that out of the way, you can keep that in mind as I continue to tell my story, and you can kind of understand a little bit more. And then when you read my story as well, and because I'm kind of filling in the gaps speaking here, when you read it, you can understand a little bit more about the mentality behind what I was dealing with. So, back to my timeline, at 4 years old, we moved to Alaska from Washington State. It was very cold. I learned about blizzards and whiteouts and ice on the roads and building igloos, and that I hate moose burgers. And even to this day, anything that remotely smells like it will make my stomach turn. I also learned that some people are really evil, and that sometimes adults don't protect children, even when it's their job to. So in the 2 years that we were there, I was raped by a teenage neighbor. The experience was so traumatizing that I only had flash memories of it then, let alone now. I don't know who or how many times it happened. I do know that we went to the police, and even then, I really couldn't. It was so traumatizing, the brain just shoves it into a box. So the police officer was asking me all kinds of questions I didn't have answers to. And then the one thing I do remember is kind of the standard thing that a rapist will tell a small child, which is, if you say anything, I'm gonna kill your family. So, which was a lie, but what do you know, you're a kid. So, drink some water. I remember going into the police station, and I don't know in what order the questions were asked, but I do remember the officer asking a pretty standard question, which is, what were you wearing? Which to a 5-year-old-ish is inconsequential, but at 41 I understand why they ask that now. They asked what happened leading up to the rape, which I didn't know. And then the one question that really burned in my mind that the female officer asked me, mainly because I liked big words, I still do, and I had no clue what she was asking. She asked me, did you do anything to instigate it? I was like, I don't understand your question. And she asked it again. And I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. And finally my mom's like, she's like 5-ish, I'm guessing. I'm cutting, splitting the difference because I don't remember how old I was. She's like, she doesn't understand your question. And so she tried to restate it. Well, did you do anything that would make him think he could do this? And I'm like, what are you even talking about right now? I remember just looking at her like she was crazy. And I'm like, this is getting nowhere. I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't understand this. To this day, I don't understand her questioning or line of reasoning. But I did walk away with one very important lesson from that questioning, is that I really don't care if you're talking to an innocent man, a woman, or a child. No one, literally no one, in the history of humanity has ever worn anything, said anything, or done anything to deserve being raped. Ever. So the question doesn't hold, it still makes no sense. I wish I could tell her that. So I remember filing out of the room in the police station with a fake glass window in it, and it was a very cold hallway. Of course, it was Anchorage, Alaska. It was like cold everywhere. And my mom sat me down in this cold, dark, green pleather chair with the metal arms on it that was like super fashionable in the 70s and 80s. And my mom and the female police officer decided they were going to discuss things, unfortunately, in earshot. So the officer told my mom that didn't really have anything to go on, because I guess raping a child was nothing to go on, and that if something actually did happen, that somebody else would come in at some point, and then maybe they would have a case. And I'm thinking, she's really willing to let this kid do this again to somebody else? I don't even understand, even to this day. But in that moment, at 5-ish, in the cold chair, in that cold hallway, I mentally froze. I literally felt something like a rubber band snap in my brain. And I stayed frozen and afraid in that chair for decades. I was unable to move or breathe or trust the world around me. And in that moment, the PTSD set in. I would continue to experience trauma through the years from my sibling, physically, emotionally, and psychologically abusing me, a lack of attention and care from both of my parents, and a lack of basic needs being met, like having enough food or clothing. I love my mother very much, and I know that as I was growing up, she had a lot of her own stuff going on, and I've made peace with her now, and I've made peace with myself, and I love her dearly, and I love watching her be able to be a grandma these days, but she had a lot going on back then. And so at 12, we had moved from Alaska back to Washington. And at 12 years old, my mom had just had enough of absolutely everything, and she dumped my 14-year-old brother and I off on her brother's doorstep. and that was where my dad was also living at the time. And she disappeared with her new husband for 2 years. Now I could actually add abandonment to my list of trauma, instead of me just thinking at 13 months that they were abandoning me like it actually happened. So my 2 oldest siblings at this point had actually moved out, so it was just my second oldest brother and I. So we all moved into an apartment. It was my dad, my one brother, and then my sister came to help take care of us, because my father traveled for work. She was 17. We had a lot of parties, a lot. I started using drugs, and I began going to raves and strip clubs at 12. I read this and I'm like, this was my life? It's so foreign at this point, which is a beautiful thing. At 13, my dad announced we were moving to New Jersey. This is where he grew up, so he was kind of going back to his roots. He was super excited. He had all this opportunity happening there. I had no clue how all of this was going to drastically change my life and give me, to this day, a love for New Jersey, which is like unheard of. But I love that place. Before leaving, now remember I'm 13. Before leaving, I saw the Sally Jesse Raphael show, and kick it back to old talk shows, and the Geraldo Rivera show. They were doing these big, huge features on New York club kids. It was like some of the most famous episodes that they ever did. And they showed all these famous club kids and club kid promoters and all these people on there, and they were just like weird and my type of people. And they showed Michael Alleg and Babyface and Astro, who was this really famous doorman at the Limelight because he was like 7 feet tall. And it was probably just the platform shoes, but he looked gigantic. So I vowed to myself that if I was going to be this close to New York City, that I was going to meet all these people. At 13, this is insanity to me. But I'm tenacious. And so we moved to New Jersey, and I asked every single person that I met, do you go to the Limelight? Do you go to the Limelight? That was the big, huge club that all these people hung out at. And I finally met some. Of course, they were characters just like me. So between the ages of 14 and 16, which I thought I was so grown at that time, but looking back, I was just a baby. Between 14 and 16, I would take the train from New Jersey into New York City, and I would go to raves and nightclubs and use drugs, and I got arrested, and overall, I was a parent's worst nightmare. Literally, my dad was like, she is going to end up in a body bag. So one of these times, because it's umpteen 25 years later, I can laugh about these things now with my dad. So about 3 weeks ago, my dad and I were hanging out with my stepmom, and he's watching a Yankees game. I don't know anything about baseball, so I'm just like sitting there hanging out with them. And I reminded my dad of this one day, the huge Yankees fan that he is. I said, Dad, do you remember the one day that we had to go to court up in the city, and there was literally 2 million people on the streets? And he's like, yes, I do. The streets were packed, the subways, the trains, everything. And my stepmom is like, why were there 2 million people on the streets? I said, because it was 1996, and the Yankees had won the World Series. Said, had I not been arrested, and had we not had to go to court that day, you would have missed it. So for that, you're welcome. Yeah, we laughed 25 years later about that, but good times. So while I was having a blast going to all of these parties and going up to the city, and I went to Pennsylvania, and I went to raves in the Brooklyn Bridge and all kinds of parties, so many parties that children should not be at. I was having a fantastic time. I didn't like where my life was heading. And I could see, because I was so young, and I was hanging out with all these people that were at least old enough to be there, I'm like, dear Lord, I don't want to be like any of these people when I'm 22 or 24. They're train wrecks. And if I continue to do what I'm doing, that's going to be me. I think I need to change a little bit. So in those 2+ years, I was doing all this stuff. I began to lose friends to drug overdoses, murder, suicide. I began seeing some of these tragedies happening, which only added to my trauma. And at that point, I realized I needed to change. Maybe one day I'll tell that whole story, but that's too much. So in the midst of all of this, all the insanity, some of it I brought on myself, some of it I just came home to all the time, I had begun to read the Bible. And I began reading it at the age of 8. It was one of those big, huge 1980s gold embossed Bibles with the holographic Jesus on the front. It was so expensive, and I was like, why are my parents paying for this thing? You've got to be kidding me. I would like new shoes, not a gold embossed Bible. So through the years, yes, I had read the Bible. I think I got up to like Deuteronomy, which is pretty good for an 8-year-old. I didn't understand any of it, but I also studied different religions. I studied Hare Krishna, I studied Buddhism, Judaism, Rastafarianism, which was by far my favorite, but it didn't line up, and I knew that. So I just felt more drawn to Scripture. And I mean, I studied these religions. I tore them apart from back to front, and I just kept coming back to the Bible. So eventually, I found what I thought was a Christian religion. And they gave free Bible studies, and that was a plus because my dad is Catholic, and they charge you for everything. So he's like, I can't afford to send you to Catholic school, or whatever their Bible teaching stuff is called. And I was like, well, hey, I met these people, and they give free Bible studies. So they came to the house and did free Bible studies. So at 17, I became a Jehovah's Witness. And I met really amazing people. I did. 2 of my favorite friends to this day that I would not have met otherwise, I met being a Jehovah's Witness. Like my best friend of 25 years. I love that woman. I met her at 15 being a Jehovah's Witness. And I learned what a healthy family structure looked like. I was shown a lot of love, which I didn't know. I was blown away by people of different colors and different socioeconomic backgrounds, all coming together and calling each other brother and sister. I was like, this is weird. You know, it's kind of like Mormonism, I think, where everybody's like brother so-and-so, sister so-and-so. They don't have the whole elder deal. And I learned I love wearing dresses because when I was a teenager, I wore those gigantic, like horrible pants. Maybe one day I'll say that about my skinny jeans. But, you know, like the A-framed pants, I guess, that are coming back in style. It was almost a dress. But you have to wear a dress when you go to church. So I was like, oh, man, I guess I have to change. I also learned how to study the Bible because I'm really good at that. And I learned also to leave things better than when I found them. My husband and I were just talking about that. Like, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you always try to leave a spot better than you found it. So in the midst of all of my life and my journey, I was a Jehovah's Witness from 17 to 23. And then at 23, we agreed to part ways, which is a separate story. But it was good. So that is 17. It makes me laugh because my husband was a very huge part of that story. So I graduated high school. Here I am. I have lived a lifetime before I even graduate high school. And I graduated high school at 18. I did it. And I went to Portland, Oregon. I was in New Jersey. I went to Portland, Oregon to visit my mom. We had been back in communication. A very long and winding story short, my mom and sister, who had moved in with my mom, told my dad that I wanted to move to Portland. Even though I had told my dad, I'm coming home, I'm coming back to New Jersey, I'm going to this college, here's my plans, this is my life. My dad just listened to them, did not consult me on it, and one day there was a knock on the door, and it was a UPS guy, and he had 24 boxes of my stuff, and I was officially living in Portland. I was not pleased, still not pleased. You can't even imagine to begin my shock when I had been planning to go back to New Jersey this whole entire time, and now I was living in Portland with my mother and sister. I gloss over a lot, and maybe at some point I can write my own book, an entire book instead of a chapter, and I can go into then maybe more detail about the abuse that I endured living in an apartment, 2 apartments, with my mother and my sister. But it's just too much and we don't have time. So at least in New Jersey, I had a safe space. I knew I could go to sleep in my bed without being violently woken up or threatened at some point during the day. I had been thrust from my safe place back into an unsafe place. So at 20, in Portland, I prayed for the first time in my life. Now mind you, I was a Jehovah's Witness. I prayed all the time. But I really prayed this time to a God I no longer had faith in. And I told him, he had 5 days to remove me from my living situation or I was going to kill myself. I was very serious. And I began packing. 1, to move at the end of the week, because he was gonna help me move, or I was making things easier for my family to get rid of my stuff once I was dead. I wrote a suicide note and realized, even though I know this isn't accurate now, then I felt that nobody would care anyways, so I threw the suicide note away. And I just wrote, I jumped off a bridge in Portland, which later somebody actually found, and I had to cover it up because I didn't. So 3 days later, I pray, I say, God, this is what you're gonna do or I'm gonna kill myself. 3 days later, I got a call about a duplex that had opened up. On day 4, I toured this duplex with a friend of mine who I had called to be my roommate. Just out of the blue, I was like, hey, you wanna move out? Let's do this. On day 5, I was moving all those packed boxes. It was really one of the first times that God very clearly answered prayer. And of course I wrote that down because that's a big deal. I was so relieved to be out of my living situation that I cried for an entire week. And I mean literally cried for a week. I woke up crying, I went to work crying, in the bathroom at work crying. My friend and I that live together, we work together, she's like, what is wrong with you? I was like, nothing. My family had told me growing up, you don't air your dirty laundry and nobody cares about your problems. So it never occurred to me to be like, I just left the most horrific abusive situation, oh my God. I was just like, nothing's wrong. Because I'm crying all over the place. So, I glossed over, right now, I just glossed over 2 of my 4 decades. In the span of 20 years, all those formative years of my life, I had dealt with rape, physical, emotional, and psychological abuse, drug and alcohol use, abandonment by my mom at 12, and my father at 19. I had witnessed a murder, someone being tortured, drug overdoses, and I had overdosed on drugs. I had sold drugs, albeit poorly, thank God. I had my fair share of teenage heartbreaks scattered in there. That was at least normal. But typically when a child experiences trauma and abuse, it follows them into adulthood. It's what our brain knows and is wrapped up in, so that is what it seeks out, even though it's not healthy. So all of this mounting trauma had begun to add up. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but I had complex post-traumatic stress syndrome and post-traumatic stress syndrome. So what is the difference between those two? So PTSD, or post-traumatic stress, is a number of different symptoms that come together to create a diagnosis. It's not just you walk in and you're diagnosed with this. So some of the symptoms include, but are not limited to, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, inability to control your emotions. And so with that, sometimes people with PTSD can come across as bipolar because they swing so high and so low. You feel outside of yourself, disconnected, disassociating, which is where your light's on, nobody home. And then I have slides. This is where we get to some of the, let's see here. Okay. So instead of covering the next 20 years of trauma, I figured we'd skip to this stuff. You get the picture. So complex post-traumatic stress, or CPTSD, is caused by ongoing trauma. Now, psychologists had to figure out this. It took them quite some time, because you have post-traumatic stress, and they're like, well, all the modalities and all the stuff that we do for people with post-traumatic stress doesn't seem to be working for the people that have decades of trauma. Like, what's the difference? And so the biggest difference is that with the length of time that an individual experiences trauma, especially when it starts in childhood, that completely weaves the brain around the trauma. With I can't even say it right now, PTSD, I was this person here, then there's a traumatic event, and then you are this person afterwards. There isn't that with CPTSD. There's just trauma. So the brain doesn't understand, here's a before moment, here's an after moment, I have something to go off of. It's just woven in there like a spider web. So, of course, with PTSD, it can be from a car crash. And I want to go over some of this because women experience this at rates 10% higher than men do. It often goes misdiagnosed. It's often misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder or anxiety disorder or anything but what it is. We're going to put you on all this medication for all of your symptoms, but we're not going to actually treat the cause. So you're not a soldier. This is what we hear a lot. You are not a soldier, you are not at war. You can't have this, which is not true. It can be from a car crash, active sexual violence, war, natural disasters, terrorist events, death of someone close to you, or serious injury or illness. And then the complex portion of it is abuse, neglect, or abandonment, domestic violence, or ongoing abuse, being tortured or kidnapped, of living through a war for a long time. None of that is fun. I'm not going to read through all of this. This is just for example purposes. So you see PTSD, and here it says, we realize the pointer on this doesn't work because the pointer's green, and that doesn't work with my slides. So it says intrusion. I couldn't fit it all on one slide. There's all that too. And I whittled it down because it would have gone on another slide. So you have avoidance, negative changes in thought or behavior, changes in arousal and reactivity, there's a lot that goes into PTSD. And then you have the complex portion of it. Like it's not enough. So with that, you have difficulty controlling emotions, again, kind of those bipolar swings, a negative self-view, difficulty with relationships, so trusting others, a negative self-view. You may avoid relationships or have unhealthy relationships because that's just what you knew. So somebody with complex PTSD, for example, let's say they end up in a physically abusive relationship and they have CPTSD because their father was abusive to them when they were growing up. So even though they know it's not right and it's not healthy at all, that's what the brain knows. And so that's what they're attracted to. So leaving that situation is extremely hard because they literally don't comprehend that there is an out. That's all they know. That's all the brain knows. That's all their emotional state knows. That's all their nervous system knows. So it's not as easy as we would anticipate. And it's easier for the people on the outside to look in and say, well, I would never end up in a situation like that. Of course you wouldn't. Neither would I. But, we didn't live that person's life. So a lot of grace is involved in dealing with other people and their trauma. Okay, we're going to skip that. So how did all of this manifest in my life? What did it look like? What does it look like? So my mental symptoms were depression, anxiety, hypervigilance, which is like being on all the time, an inability to concentrate or finish tasks, feeling separated or detached from the world. Like I really felt like almost alien-esque, like I don't have anything in common with anybody. I had issues with women because of all the stuff that had happened. So it's like amazing that I'm even here talking to all of you ladies. Everything that had happened with my mom, it was very hard for me to connect with women because I'm like, I'm nothing like them. Disassociation, which is being on autopilot, losing hours, days, or weeks, or years at a time. Heightened awareness and inability to relax. Victim mentality, life was always happening to me. Irrational reactions to small annoyances. My husband got to witness that, driving in a car with me when we were first dating at 24. I used to have crazy road rage. I forgot. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, the physical symptoms. We'll go to that. So physical symptoms: headaches, migraines, back pain, digestion issues, IBS symptoms, exhaustion, getting sick constantly, high cholesterol, hypothyroidism, insomnia. Oh man, I'm so happy I sleep now. Inability to focus and adrenal fatigue. So what happens with PTSD, and this is with anybody, God's design is so amazing. The nervous system kicks in and is like, a lion is chasing you and you need to run. There's a bomb just dropped over there, we need to get out of here. Like the way that he designed our body is perfect. And so when this state kicks in, everything else slows down. The important thing is the autonomic nervous system. My eyes blink, I salivate, my heart beats, my lungs breathe. It pulls blood from your extremities and puts it into your torso so that if you lose a limb, you literally bleed less. That's how amazing his design of our body is. But when you're stuck in this state for a long time because of trauma, the body begins to shut down. And so all of these horrible things happen. So, a little bit about the nervous system. This is like my favorite part because God's design is amazing. So, I did not come up with this information. I just want to point out at the very bottom, you'll see the holistic psychologist. And I don't know if any of you ladies are familiar with her. She is amazing. But some of these slides, anything that I took from her site has her little logo on the bottom. So, learning our nervous system is key to healing. For from a lot of things, but especially from this. So there are 3 main states in our nervous system that we experience. Knowing what state you're in, or the state that other people are in, can help us understand ourselves better and other people better, maybe have a little bit more grace with ourselves and others. So most mental health disorders are actually symptoms of nervous system dysregulation. So like I said before, kind of the bipolar swings, if you can get your nervous system under control, then that's not going to happen because you're calm. This is a state we all want to be in. This is our parasympathetic state. You feel safe, social, and able to connect with people. You can make eye contact and feel joy. It's probably how we all feel after church. Our thoughts are curious and open. We're like a child. I can manage my life. It doesn't matter what happens. And I can make clear decisions. Then there's this state. I don't know where they come up with these names. The sympathetic state. This is our fight, flight, or freeze state. You say you're like a deer in headlights. That's our freeze response. God gave that to us for a reason. All this has a reason. So in this state, we're in survival mode. We're aggressive and prepared to defend ourselves. Let me sit here so my back isn't like completely to y'all. We feel out of control. The world is dangerous and threatening. There's thoughts of hostility, rage, and fear. Life is very overwhelming and extremely unmanageable. You're unable to think clearly or make decisions. Like even the smallest amount of decisions when I am in this state are so overwhelming. Literally like making my child's lunch and I'm like, oh my God, I can't handle this right now. And my husband has to deal with this stuff. Thank you. There is the dorsal vagal, which is last but not least, and this is where we shut down. So we're completely disassociated, numb, and feel no emotion, disconnected from ourself and others. It really is a place of being completely outside of yourself. One feels uninterested and has no energy. The world is not worth living in. This is a state a lot of people enter in when they commit suicide. Thoughts are hopeless and apathetic. Life is pointless. And occasionally, unless you're me, your voice and facial expressions are monotone. I don't think that's possible here. So, what are ways to get us back to that happy place and that happy state? This is all part of my wonderful journey. A state of focus and relaxation, like movement, static dancing, or shaking. It sounds weird, but it works. Some of this stuff works for people, some of it does not. Cold exposure works for some people, it makes me worse. Practicing consciousness work, being present in your body, it's as silly as like putting your feet on the ground and putting your hands on your thighs and saying, I am here in this moment. Because the brain literally, when it's in fight or flight mode, ping-pongs off into other areas. So bringing yourself back to a state of consciousness. Practicing meditation, which is just focused breathing, different types of breath work, massaging yourself. You see me doing this, like massaging yourself, going and getting a massage, creating solid boundaries, learning to say no, which our society has a problem with. All of that reduces stress. Up on the side, a girlfriend of mine introduced me to this app. It's called Oak Meditation. It is actually free, unlike the ones that say that they're free and then charge you $60. Right? Just to hear Matthew McConaughey whisper to you. Right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. So, Oak Meditation is a free app, and it walks a person through short or long meditation practices, which is just teaching you how to breathe. As adults, we breathe from the top of our lungs. If you look at children breathe, they breathe from the bottom of their lungs. So you'll actually see their stomachs moving, where with adults, you see the tops of our chests moving. So it teaches you how to breathe again. Oh, and a little hint, there's no such thing as not thinking. That's not the point of meditation. The point of meditation is just to not put any energy into your thoughts. So other practices that I have personally used that have worked for me. Oh good, there's enough TVs, so no matter where you are, you can see this. Meditation, restorative yoga, like the Christ-centered yoga, that's gonna start here, which is awesome. Trauma therapy, because therapists are awesome. EMDR therapy, which is specifically for trauma. EVOX, which is perception reframing, which is really huge for somebody with complex PTSD, because of the fact that there is no before personhood. EVOX has the ability to go in and actually shift perception on certain memories or ideas, and it begins to unravel that spider web of trauma out of the brain. Eating a clean diet sounds simple, but what is clean? Back in my early 20s, I used to think that eating a clean diet meant like one Burger King sandwich for breakfast instead of 2. Maybe like 1 sugar in my coffee instead of 10. So it's, again, perception. What is your idea of clean? But eating a clean diet, it heals the gut, it increases natural serotonin, which is our happy hormone. Again, God gives us all of these wonderful things. And most of our serotonin is created in our gut. So we need to take care of that. It eliminates brain frogs as well. It increases energy, reduces inflammation, helps control cortisol levels, reduces depression and anxiety, and helps with sleep. I was an insomniac for 30 years. I can't tell you how much I love sleep. It is amazing. All y'all who have never had insomnia, you're blessed. So putting myself on a sleep schedule. That has been really important, not just for babies, for adults too. Supplements, and my supplements have shifted as I've gone through my healing journey. Journaling, I journal almost every night, at least 3 to 4 times a week. I have books and books of my life, which is really cool to go back on because I can read my life story from like 12 forward. Getting outside into the sunshine. If you want to wear a hat, I always wear a hat. If you want to wear a hat, fine. No sunglasses. If you have the glasses with like the blue, I think they're doing this in most people's glasses, it's some blue film to keep the UV light out of your eyes, take those off. The body needs sunshine. It helps our thyroid, it helps our vitamin D levels, which is great for brain fog and energy, so we need some sunshine. If you can get outside for an hour, great. If not, 10 to 15 minutes, it's amazing. So, getting outside into the sunshine, focusing on friendships that understand you instead of trying to build new ones. Building new relationships can be stressful when you're trying to heal. But even with all of this, God still hasn't completely healed me. But my personal progress, first one on the list, my hair grew back because I used to have bald spots, which anybody with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's knows how that goes. Your hair just falls out in clumps and it is horrible. So my hair grew back. It's very exciting. It's one of the reasons I keep it long because I'm so happy I have it. Hypothyroidism is under control. My cholesterol and my hormones are back in normal ranges. My cholesterol was like 220, which I guess is really bad. The doctor was like, oh my God. I was like, what? Is that bad? I didn't know. It's normal now. I have no IBS symptoms, no more digestion issues. I've gone from 18 to 20 migraines a month to an average of 2, which isn't too shabby. I have a lot less back pain. My depression is way down. I think I get depressed like as much as everybody else in the world does at this point. My anxiety is rare. Today it was a little up there, understandably so. I no longer have panic attacks, which is huge for me. I had a panic attack, I think it was like last year, and I hadn't had one in so long, I literally didn't know what was happening. And I was like, wait a second, I think I remember this. It's a panic attack, I know what to do. I have a number of really amazing friendships with women, which is big for me. I feel a lot more grounded and present. I speak my truth. no matter how hard it is. And sometimes my timing is really bad, but I'm just like, whoa, you're gonna hear this right now. I'm sorry for when I do that to you. I am better at creating boundaries, which reduces my stress. I still disassociate a lot, but I continue to work on that. I'm cognitive that I disassociate now, which is a massive step in healing from disassociation. So when I disassociate, I'm very much lights on, nobody home. I'll lose an hour, a day, a week. I've lost years sometimes. That's the most frightening, because I don't even know. I'm like, I don't know what I did, who I spoke to, what happened. But again, I journal a lot, even in my disassociative states, I journal a lot. So I can go back and actually read like, oh my God, this is what I did for a month. I don't know where I was. So what do we do when God doesn't heal us? These are words that do not help. Maybe make a list of these. Things that have not helped in my healing journey. You lack faith. Okay. You need to pray more. If you pray more, God will heal you. It doesn't say that anywhere in the scriptures. God doesn't give you more than you can handle, which is also a scriptural fallacy. He gives us a lot more than we can handle sometimes, but that's why we have God. Forgiveness means restoring the relationship. Christians are called to long suffering. We are called to long suffering, but not rape, abuse, violence, neglect. Trauma is not long suffering, and it would behoove us all to stop telling trauma victims that God called us to long suffering. If you truly believed in Jesus, he would have healed you. I heard that about a month ago and I laughed. God doesn't allow bad things to happen to good people. You had to have done something to deserve it. I did laugh at that one when somebody said that to me. This was so long ago. Why are you not over it yet? It could be worse. Okay. At least you don't have fill in the blank. My personal favorite. You shouldn't be talking about this in public. Don't air your dirty laundry to people. It's too late for that. So scriptures and words that actually helped. I'm sorry to hear you experience that. It's pretty simple. I'm so shocked, I don't know what to say. Sometimes we don't have to, I'm the same way where I just want to say the most perfect thing. Sometimes you just don't have anything. We're not psychologists. We're not clinicians. We don't know. Most of the time, none of us deal with this horrific stuff on a daily basis. We don't know what to say. Just admit it. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. Can I pray with you? That's an amazing one. Learning to forgive doesn't mean restoring relationships. I'm proud of you for creating healthy boundaries. Have you been able to see God in any of this? That's like a deep one. Use that for a friend, not a stranger. But don't be shocked if they say no. They don't. And don't try to fix it. Or come up with that most perfect thing to say. You just listen to their answer and accept it. I can sit here with you while you cry. I love that. Would you like a hug? Because we're humans and some of us like hugs. How can I support you through this? I have one friend. She texts me or calls me every Sunday, just because. She knows my story, and she's just checking in. How are you? I'm on a list for her, which I love. So, how can I support you? Pretty simple. Some of my favorite scriptures, and these are in your booklets, some verses that have really helped me. Annie's holding it up. It's on the table for everybody. So these are some of the takeaways. God's grace is sufficient. We hear this all the time, but what does that mean? 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon you." Nothing here says he will heal us if we have a certain amount of faith in him at all. Can God heal us? Of course he can. He can do anything he wants. Does he always heal us? No. Is he any less sovereign when he does not choose to heal us for whatever reason? We all know the answer is no, he's no less sovereign, but do we believe that? Do we walk that out? We still believe, we still ask God, we still believe for ourselves to be healed, we still pray. The Bible says still pray, still continue to ask. But to have faith in his process and in the journey, that if he doesn't heal us, it's for a purpose. His grace is sufficient. In this, that does not negate any of our suffering, and it doesn't negate the need to seek help or discuss hardships with people in safe spaces. God walks with us. This is huge. As I look back on my life, I really began to draw decent boundaries when I was 38. I'm 41. It's not that long ago. So, in that though, he has been with me and has walked with me through my journey. Deuteronomy 31:8 says, "It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." How many times the scriptures tell us, do not fear. God is perfect in love, and sin is what brought fear into the picture. Rest in God, rest in that perfect love, and know he doesn't ever leave. Even when it's hard to see, when the building of our life and the temple of our bodies collapsing around us, God is with us. He travels the road before us. He's always with us, literally. He will never leave us nor forsake us. No matter what happens, we're going to be okay. Romans 14:8, whether we live or we die, it is Christ. So whether we live or we die, we're good. Right? How amazing is that? It doesn't matter, because we're going to be okay. That's really hard when we're in the midst of exhausting trauma or, health battles or life crises, but I think he's got us. His will, not ours. Mark 14:36. This is a really powerful scripture, and in the context of it is Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing everything that is about to happen to him. He's going to be tortured. He's going to be put on the cross. He's going to die. All these false charges are going to come against him. His 12 disciples, I almost called them homies. They're not homies. His 12 homies that they should have been, but they were not. They left him. So, I think at some point these guys were even sleeping. He's like, "Hey, watch out for me," and they went to bed. And so, he's literally praying, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you." And the words that really stick out to me is he doesn't dilly-dally. He's not like, "Hey, if you were feeling it, could you maybe remove this cup from me?" No, he pleads, "Remove this cup from me. Yet, not what I will, but what you will." That is a tremendous amount of faith. I don't know if I have it, but I love this scripture because it exemplifies it. So even when we are suffocating in life's issues, which happens, all of us, we have experienced that. When we can't see, when we don't understand what's going on, when love fails, when people fail us, the job lets you go, your business fails, or whether the stars align and everything in your world is going absolutely perfect and couldn't get any better. It's all God's will and not ours. It takes a massive amount of trust in an unseen God. But it's a muscle we have to train. We have to train it. We don't become a Christian and just experience this faith. It doesn't happen. I just realized I skipped a massive part of my story. And that's the story of how I became a Christian. That's kind of funny. I'm going to finish this. Do we have time for me to backtrack? Okay. So, one of the things that I do to train this muscle is to write down every blessing and every answered prayer. Whenever I doubt, I go back to these lists. And again, I have my journals, so there's lots of lists inside my journals of answered prayers. So, one wonderful thing about God is Isaiah 55:11. He says, "So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty." I can barely return a text message. I mean, this is amazing. "But it shall accomplish that which I purpose and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it." Okay, I'm going to drink some water and see where I messed up here. Which is really great because Donald was like, "You're gonna mess up. It happens. Everybody does it." Nailed it. Where is he? I blame him. No. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is so good. Okay. It's not that long. So, when I was 31 years old, that is far into my journey, I was finally diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't know what that meant at all, but I was like, I think that fits. I had read enough, I read a lot, and I had studied stuff about soldiers, and I was like, yeah, no, that totally fits. I didn't know women got that. So with everything that was going on in my world, I was a mess, literally. I like to wear masks, I like to pretend that everything was good in my world, but it was not. I had 2 major nervous breakdowns. I had been put on suicide watch at one point. I had no clue how to change at all. I mean, I was literally raised by wolves. Like, I was not given any tools in my tool belt to function as an adult. But around 2007, the boyfriend that I had at the time, who was now my husband, knew a Christian pastor. And that was the only Christian that I knew. Everybody else I knew was Jehovah's Witnesses. And I wasn't allowed to talk to them anymore, so they were out of the picture. And I just knew I needed Jesus. That's it. I was like, I just need Jesus. Every cell in my body was like, I don't know what this looks like. I just need Christ. So I contacted that pastor. And I told him, I have a couple of questions for you. Would you meet me for lunch? And to this day, we laugh about this story because he prepared what he thought, mid-20s young woman living with her boyfriend was going to ask. He prepared the sex before marriage questions, the cohabitation questions. He knew he had nailed this whole process and that I was just going to sit down and ask him these questions. But I already knew all that. Like, I had read and studied the Bible for years. I already knew that. But Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in the Trinity. So little did he know, I sat him down and he's like, so ready to go. He's got his notes. He's going to crush this conversation. And I was like, so can you explain the Trinity to me? And I would like some scriptural references. He was not prepared, but he crushed it, clearly, because I'm here. So I decided I was going to go to each Christian church. I didn't know anything about church at all. I had been Catholic church and a Kingdom Hall. That was it. I decided I was going to go to each Christian church 3 times. I just said 3. That happened 3 times. And then I was going to move on. That was very Shrek of me right now. So the third time at my friend's church, though, and man, the worship was like a rock band every Sunday. It was a lot. I was not used to that either. Happened to be Easter, 2008. And the pastor did an altar call. And I went up to the altar that day. Some would say I became a Christian at that point. I accepted God's call on my life. I didn't know what that meant. I had never heard any of these terms. I got baptized in water. Third time was a charm. I was baptized as a Catholic. I was baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. I was now baptized as a born-again Christian. Right? Like something had to work. I got baptized in the Holy Spirit. But looking back, I was really just invited to the party on that day. How many of you in here, this is one of my favorite books, how many of you have ever read or seen the movie The Great Gatsby? Right? Like, it's good. So human. But Gatsby threw these parties, and everybody was invited. It's like church. Everybody can come. But nobody knew who Gatsby was. It was not Robert Redford or Leonardo DiCaprio. Nobody knew who he was. Everybody had stories about him. Well, I heard he was a German soldier. Well, I heard... It's the same thing with Christ. Everybody's invited to the party. Not everybody really knows him. I didn't know this at the time. So I met a lot of great people. Again, I'm a talker and an extrovert. I meet a lot of people. I helped out at church. I changed churches. I met more amazing people. I helped out in ministries. I did all kinds of stuff. I was phenomenal at changing my behavior, which I eventually would learn was a trauma response. But 2 weeks before I got married, in 2011, I went to a women's retreat. It's with Scottsdale Bible in Williams. I don't know how many of you ladies have been up there. It's like the place, right? Yeah, it's the place that you go for women's retreats. So I was seriously struggling at that time, making some pretty big decisions in my life and my walk with God, and I just felt completely disconnected from Him. So on the last day, we're all in the giant sanctuary that they have there, and I'm walking down to take communion, and I had really been struggling, and I'll spare the story, but I had really been struggling with this idea of feeling like Christ was behind a door, and I could not get to the other side of this door in order to experience Him in His fullness. It was just like this mental block that I had, and I'm like, I really just feel like He's behind this door. So I walked down to take communion, and the lady breaks the bread off, and she says, "This is the body of Christ." And she dips it in the wine, and she says, "And this is the blood of Christ." And then she looks me dead in the face as she's handing me this, and she says, "I am the door." And I'm just looking at her like, what? And I start chewing. I'm like, well, that was weird. And I go to turn to walk away as I'm chewing and just totally lost in the moment, and met Christ in a very real, very tangible way. So real that I literally gasped because I was shocked at what I saw in front of me, and I fell on my face. I never thought I would be one of those people. I used to make fun of them when I was like 16, 17 years old. My brother and I would smoke a lot of weed, and we would watch the Jesus channels and laugh at all of these people. And now I was one of those people. God has an infinite sense of humor. I literally fell on my face. And at Scottsdale Bible, that doesn't like go over super well. So I hear women freaking out and call an ambulance and what is wrong with her, and my friends come running and they're shaking me, and tears are streaming down my face, and all I could muster out was the word, Jesus. And a couple of my girlfriends were like, she's fine. She's good. I could not pick myself up off the floor. It was the weirdest thing. It was like, in a good way, but I literally was frozen and I could not move. And then I began to get embarrassed because I'm like, this is not that type of church. Like, it's not that type of party. I need to get myself off the ground. And so I'm like dragging myself in the front of the sanctuary, sobbing my eyes out. And a girlfriend of mine is sitting on the steps and she's just looking at me like, dear Lord, get over here. And I'm like, I can't move. It was beautiful, and I wish somebody had it on camera because I would have liked to have seen it. That day, I became a Christian. And I was never the same. I'm not the same. I'm still imperfect. I still make really horrible decisions, as all Christians do. I still have stress and pain, and that's all just a part of life. But now, I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my God walks with me in all of this. But in that moment, God didn't miraculously heal me of any of my stuff. I just met him. That was it. But that's huge. Simultaneously, that's massive. The one thing God did miraculously heal me of was in 2009, I had 2 herniated discs in my neck. I had had those for 8 years. It is insanely painful and debilitating, and God chose to heal me of that. Thank you, I sleep a lot better. But sanctification is a process and a journey. The process of sanctification, if he heals us immediately, where's the journey in that? It's an awesome story, but in the process of me walking through this journey, I have learned a lot that I wouldn't have learned otherwise had he just healed me. I would have never have studied food labels and supplements and what I put in my body, how to heal myself through food and nutrition. I would not have never have looked into things like EMDR therapy and EVOX and all these weird labeled things that I do. I would have never done any of that. And how God has used all of those things in my life to now in turn help other people. None of that would happen if he had just healed me. So the process of sanctification is amazing. Miraculous healing can be a part of that story, but often God just wants to build our faith and our trust in him by walking with us, not by removing our struggles. We really would like him to sometimes, but he doesn't always do that. So, I backtracked a little, but I think it worked. You were right. I totally messed up. I skipped this whole huge section. Nailed it. It was awesome. But I backtracked, and you heard the story, so it worked out. I love that. So, it's hard to mess up when it's your own story, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And thank you very much for being here, and thank you for listening. Oh, Annie, you can come up. You're good. Yeah, thank you for listening. This is my first time ever telling this story, and so it means the world to me that all of the ladies came out and were gracious and heard me out. So thank you very much.
So in your packet, it's maybe the second to last page, Christina's offering for those that are in attendance this evening.